Well, we're looking over Sears Point as it was and is now Sonoma Raceway, Velocity Invitational. I like to use Sears Point because this is an historical event. We are, about an hour or so from San Francisco, city by the bay, and it's been a beautiful weekend so far as we turn our attention next to the next group in action. And once again, we've got some fantastic cars on display for you. And Taylor and Kev doing a great job, just kind of bringing the atmosphere of the place. And it's great to have people who literally just plucked out of the crowd to get a ride and enjoy it. And you get a sense of how much they enjoy it. And I'm watching these crowds flow in here. It's a big weekend. We had Veterans Weekend or Veterans Day yesterday, so a day off on Friday here in America. So we've got a crowd yesterday as well. But just to give you an idea of what's coming up, we've got McLaren Formula One. They'll be in action. Pato O'Ward and Benjamin Pedersen doing Dirtfish as well. So we've got IndyCar drivers galore here. We had Alexander Rossi. You saw his track map earlier. And he unfortunately having to attend a wedding this weekend. So he's not here at the moment. But now, these are our collector's cars. We've got some fantastic displays of different cars here. There's Merc coming up here. Beautiful. So we've got a host of cars from, well, a really eclectic group, in fact, of cars coming up now. And we've got sports cars. We've got single-seaters, some Le Mans cars. And you'll know your Warsteiner sponsorship. That's another side of historic racing that is absolutely important, and that is trying to stay with the same colors, the same paintwork, the same paint schemes, and the same sponsorship deals that were done in the day. And so that's a hard thing to pull off as well. Imagine these cars stripped down or sorted into getting them prepped. You've also got to prep the colors right from the day, so people are poring over photographs and making sure that they've got the right decals, the right colors, the right tones of colors as they were in the day. And like I said, we've got, as well as this, our first, well, it's our second exhibition group. Remember, we had the ragtime earlier today. Well, this is our second. The next exhibition group will be our Formula One, and we've got some fantastic McLarens from not that long ago, I may add, that will be in action. But we've got some pretty handy racing drivers, including Lando Norris, current Formula One driver, and, of course, Pato O'Ward, current IndyCar driver. We've also got Tony Kanaan, one of the greats, who's just retired from Indy, but is still part of McLaren as an advisor. And they'll be in action later. Tanner Faust, who I mentioned earlier, who is a multiple rally cross and rally champion here in the USA, as well as being a stunt driver and filmmaker, TV star. We'll hopefully hear from Tanner. Great guy and a great character, to be honest. He'll be in action. He's actually getting a chance to drive one of the McLaren Formula One cars. And if you know anything about modern Formula One cars, and to a certain extent some of these cars, it takes a village to get them going and to prepare them just to get out on track. So you can imagine behind the scenes, there's quite a few folks doing their bit. And that's that 73 that I've seen parked up, and I think that's, I want to say a Peter Revson car. Ah, David Hobbs. It's a Schmozzle car. A David Hobbs. David Hobbs drove this in the day, I think a 5000. And David, of course, still very much involved in historic racing with Brian Redman. They do their the Ryan Redman annual race at Elkhart Lake at Road America. And if you don't know David or haven't heard of anything he's done, of course, most recently he was involved in Formula One with the NBC crew but still does a lot of historic stuff and racing. But David, like Brian Redman, two great exports who came over to the States, and I think that's another factor that you need to factor in when you're looking at historic racing is the amount of top drivers like David, like Brian Redman, and like Bruce McLaren, Chris Amon, Dan Gurney, of course, from America, but that came over to take on. And at the time, those guys were absolutely killing it. Jackie Hicks is another one. Vic Elford, sadly, we've lost Vic. But they all came over, and it didn't matter whether it was Can-Am, Trans Am, and that was the nature of the day. And I think people like Lando Norris are almost jealous of the ability for drivers to do that. So people like Lando getting a chance to run around in an older McLaren, it's just what they love to do, and it's very much the spirit of what Bruce, Denny Hilby used to be called the Bruce and Denny Show, because they were both Kiwi drivers, would come here, do Can-Am, do Trans Am, do IMSA, obviously Sebring 12 hours, Daytona 24 hours, those all held earlier in the year, and then do Le Mans in the summer, in June. And we've got a couple of Le Mans cars out there at the moment. Yeah, and we've mentioned the collectors and the guys that own these cars. They go to auction, and as you heard, the Mario Andretti car, the winning Lotus, going up for auction in Abu Dhabi in a few weeks' time. And so collectors very much a part of keeping these historic cars relevant and important. And as you can see from high above on the drone, not too many of them out there in this collector's things. I'm sure more will come up as the weekend continues. But you get to see now from the drone, just that there's McLaren. The papaya colors. I was watching a documentary on the run-up to this about the logo being made for Bruce. Very simple, for the McLaren original logo. And it was just a Kiwi, a checkered flag, but distinctive in its own way. And of course, Brabham, Jack Brabham that is, picked up young Bruce McLaren as a kid. In fact, Bruce won a scholarship to go to Great Britain and work with Cooper, because that's who Brabham was with at the time, before he set his own company up, Brabham Racing. And that kind of was an inspiration for Bruce McLaren to do what he did, which is to have his own McLaren race team. He came over and worked for Jack Brabham. And the story goes that as a 21-year-old, he came with a mechanic from New Zealand, Wilmot, and met Mr. Cooper and said, well, where's my car that I'm driving? And he said, pointed a bunch of parts and bits and said, well, that's it right there. There's your car, build it. And so they had to, and they did. And they went into Formula 2 and started winning, not far off immediately. So from there on in, Sir Jack's recommendation was a good one. Beautiful Ferrari. Priceless indeed. Going to get you some more information on each and every of these cars. I have to be honest, these are the one group, the collectors, that we don't have information for, but I will find it as the weekend goes on. And there's effectively a lull in the racing for a few minutes before we go back to our regular group racing. And coming up next at 11:15 will be our Group 2 qualifying race. That's then followed by McLaren F1. Then we'll have more from Group 8. We've also got some historic Formula 1 cars out here, and I'm going to be joined by a man who's driven many of them and knows most of the drivers. I saw him talking to them yesterday, so we'll get an input there. But it's a small field of Formula 1 cars that go back to 66 and up to the 80s. And then, of course, we've got the modern Formula 1 cars. And I say that, we've got, what, 99? We've got a Mika Hakkinen championship winning. We've even got Lewis Hamilton's 2008 winning McLaren. And also one of Bruce's early Formula One cars. The GTO is absolutely gorgeous, though. Not sure who's at the wheel, but somebody's getting a passenger ride. And the inclusivity is what it's all about. Also, you want to hang around later in the day. We've got the Mini versus Mustang and all that we've been talking about today, which is the relatively small displacement European cars, and the Mini absolutely fits into that, versus the Mustang, the Ford Mustang, which of course, plenty of power. And you will see exactly detailed how they go on against each other in pure racing. Evidently last night they practiced, and it was quite quite a moment. It's one of the hypercars that's out there. So we're getting more and more in this collector's exhibition. There's a nice juxtaposition. Aston Martin in the number 18 in those classic green colours. You could have a full historic Aston Martin weekend quite easily, and through its iterations all the way up to Formula One. I'm sure Mr. Stroll is thinking about it. He's got his own track in Canada. He can certainly put it on. And just some other highlights I want to point you to. We've got the Gunther Works display as well here. And that is basically cars like Porsche's 911s that are made to almost custom rebuilt. Take the basics of a brand new Porsche and then turn it into something quite special. We've also got a TVR display. We've got that Navia display, which is an electric boat. So we are looking. Then we've got the supercars and the hypercars, as I mentioned. Bell Helicopter have got a stand here as well. And we've got a host of different wineries being purveyed, both drunk and tasting. Mentioned the Rally School, you've spoken to Sotheby's. We've also got the Ford Performance display, and of course it's a kind of a really interesting time for Ford as well. That's in the middle of the paddock. They'll be showing off their wares, the latest GTs as well. Of course, we're talking about the future with the racing Mustang. Got a kid zone, an autograph session zone as well. And then this McLaren automotive display also part of it. But if you are here at the event, I would urge you to go and head down to Velocity Lane as we take a look at that Group C Mercedes. That's a cracker. Remember those back in the day. Sauber and Mercedes coming together to produce a car that was just sensational in its time. Michael Schumacher starting his career, or getting a name for himself, racing in sports cars before he did Formula One. Definitely a huge part of the Mercedes comeback to racing. If you remember, they quit racing in 1955 after a massive incident where several people were killed, and I say several, but probably over 50 in the end, and Mercedes decided that that was it for them, and they pulled out of racing out of respect, which was, at the time, no question, the right thing to do. And then they came back, and since they've been back, both in sports cars and in Formula One, it has been a pretty impressive story for Mercedes-Benz. And we've got even a 1908 Benz before they were Mercedes-Benz. right here on display. So another opportunity, if you're here, to see some of the history of Mercedes as part of the collector's cars. In the main thoroughfare, we've got a host of cars from 1908 all the way up to this Group C car. Carl Wendlinger, Michael Schumacher, great drivers in their day in these sports cars at Le Mans and in the World Sports Car Championship, Group C. It's hard to see who's going to get out there for the collectors because we see them parked up. We're not sure who's actually going to take to the track or not. Anyway, the checkered flag out on our collectors. So we'll take a short break again here, and more action coming up from the next group in action, and that will be Group 2, their qualifying race coming up from Sonoma. So stay with us.